So we're going to be sharing some thoughts or some memories of Dad. This guy here was known as Dougal. And I'm going to talk a bit about Dad's early years, and I'll talk about... Yeah, this is hard. I promise you I'll get it together. Anyway, I'm going to share some of my sort of favourite memory stuff that I really relate to with Dad. Dad was born into the Robinson family in 1934 in Barrow near Newmarket, joining his older brother Bruce, and Uncle Bruce is here today. Thank you for a great time yesterday, Uncle Bruce. You're great. Both sons of Claude and Beryl Robinson. You know, the thing that I'm kind of fascinated by is that my dad was delivered into this world by his grandfather, who was a surgeon in his own home, which I thought was fantastic. Dad and Bruce grew up in their home. Their home's called Roselle in Northwood, Middlesex. And it was, I described it as kind of calm neighborhood. It was like very sophisticated, it was lovely and gorgeous. But we all know Dad, he was trouble. By the way, Uncle Bruce, you weren't so great either. So, despite the perceived tranquility of where they lived, they gleefully terrorized the neighborhood with activities, including a thing called putty wagging. And for those of you that don't know what putty wagging is, it's not an Olympic sport yet. But what they did is they got together wet clay and made a ball of it, put it on the end of a stick, and then they crept around the neighborhood and flung this putty to stick on the walls of people's homes, especially people that had white walls. So they were so delighted and gleefully happy when the sun came out and the putty dried and dropped off and they left these big yellow stains. So it's kind of classic to me that they reveled in that, and they took great delight teaching Doug, myself, cousin Mark, how to do that. So they were raising us the right way, I guess. So continuing with family tradition, my dad went to Uppingham School, his brother went there, his father went there. I'm not sure about prior generations, but it was a family tradition. And so he joined Uppingham School probably at the age of around 8 years old, just after World War II ended, and his father was away during the war, which I think has probably explained his very, very close relationship with his mother. So in the 1940s, Uppingham was a very tough environment. I don't know if you're familiar with boarding schools, but it was a very tough environment. There was a lot of cruelty, a lot of bullying. They lived in houses of 50 people, managed by fosters and stuff. It was a tough environment. But Dad was incredibly good at sports, and I think that kind of made it a lot easier for him. I know a lot of you here today played golf with him, and I look forward to hearing about that later today. But when he was at Uppingham, amazingly, he was a 3-year blue, both in cricket and rugby, which is frankly unheard of. He was captain of cricket. He went on to play for Middlesex. He played for the MCC. He was considered for the England B team. In addition to that, he told me, by the way, none of that is true, but he told me, probably one of his dad's stories, but he told me that he was coached for a while by Dennis Compton. On top of that, he also played at Junior Wimbledon, as did Uncle Bruce. So we all know Dad was very talented, and obviously years later he got into the habit of playing golf. We then had to grow up. Certainly, I remember being at Uppingham, being in the hall, having lunch, and up on the wall, and the big gold letters would be M.I. Robinson all over the place, because he was an accomplished athlete. He spent time in Cyprus as a captain in the Royal Anglican Regiment. He then later went to Shuttleworth College, where he started dating the principal's daughter, who happens to be my mother, who is here today. And so that's how Doug and I entered this world. He was a farmer and blessed to live at Lambert's Farm in Suffolk. I always looked at that as just being a complete blessing to have the opportunity to live outside in the country. And yes, farming is not an easy job, and Doug will be elaborating on that. But I thought that was a very lucky, gifted man in that respect. When he started playing golf, he ended up being, as probably many of you know, but he was chairman of the Greens between 75 and 82, and then he became captain and ultimately became president of the club. He also put a lot of work into helping build the credibility of the club within Suffolk. He also worked hard for the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme by running a golfing society, and they raised a lot of funds for that. But I also had a laugh because I was working for a design agency in London, and Dad asked me, could we help do the posters for them? So we keep getting these phone calls and said, well, I just heard from the palace, and we should know more later today. But the way Dad would tell the story, for those of you who know that Dad, you'd think he was actually talking to the Queen or maybe the Duke of Edinburgh, which obviously was not the case, but he thought it was. And then, he was secretary of the NFU Golfing Society as well. So, as we all know, he was kind of multi-talented and did a lot of things. From a family man perspective, he's proud to have 5 grandchildren. Sam, Alex is here today. You'll hear a poem from Alex. Sam, Harry, Riley, and Reese, unfortunately able to be here, but not able to be here. They're in the US right now. And he recently smiled with great gratitude, and even though, he obviously in the last few years he wasn't completely aware of what was going on, though he had moments of lucidity, he was so happy to hear that he'd become a great-grandfather, so my Alex's son, his son Felix. So we're delighted about that. He was also a treasured godfather to Mark and also his brothers as well, and also Anna, who's attending today. And I know, Anna, you're out there somewhere. I know you have a very special relationship with Dad, and thank you so much for being here today. And as he became older, he became much more vocal about the need to support each other and treasure what we have as a family. He was also a really fun dad. I just have a little bit more to go through, but he was a really fun dad. As I think we all know, he loved people. He loved relationships. He was always the life and soul of the party. He was a master of conversation. I will say, and I know there's one lady here from the Baylen Care Centre who took wonderful care of Dad. And when we went to see them after he'd passed, I was listening to one of the ladies say to Sid that he was one of the loving ones. He had a contagious laugh, and he shared a lot. We just laughed at the most stupid things. For example, he visited me in the US one time, and we were at a friend's house, and it was thick snow outside, and we looked out the window. Just Dad loved to look at what was going on, and he looked out the window, and there's a guy across the street who had his own snowplow. It was kind of cool to have a tribal snowplow. And this guy lost control and drove his snowplow through his garage door. Dad and I laughed ourselves crazy. And we laughed and we laughed and we laughed. And later that day we got in the car and drove down the street. We were still laughing. And that was Dad. He just loved all that stuff. I have other memories of that, but I'll share some of them with you later if you'd like to learn more about them. But yeah, he was crazy. The other one the one I remember very fondly was when we were apparently celebrating his 50th birthday in Amsterdam. And we went to an Italian restaurant there, and the main course, dessert, right? No. We had 8 main courses. We were there all night. We were the last people there, and we had the funniest night ever. Thank you, Liz. You're in the crowd there somewhere. Thank you for paying for that. The most ridiculous thing, which again underscores Dad. The next day, well, we need to have lunch. Where should we go? We went back to the Italian restaurant. For me personally, I've got a few more things to say, and then I'll hand over to Doug. My biggest connection with Dad was his creative side. I'm probably more the creative one. You're more the... I'm not creative. You're the beast. Dad loved drawing. He was very good at drawing. It was beautiful to see it. Sin bought him drawing books and pens and things like that when he was in Badenham, and he took great pleasure in drawing right up to his final days. I remember a time with Dad, we sat in a square in Amsterdam drinking coffee, drawing the architecture. And I don't know why, I just never forget that. It was just so wonderful. And I also remember a time where we were at my in-laws in Maine, and he looked out the window, and it was in the fall, and they have a form of aspen pine, but there's a version of that tree on the East Coast in the States. And it was a full day, and the wind was blowing, and the leaves looked like gold coins, and they were kind of just doing this. And I just remember him pointing that out because I thought I was one of the few people that saw that stuff and loved it. So that was great. He also, he was a big into photography, as am I. He spent a lot of time Sin was under marching orders for many years, you know, got to get back somewhere by a certain time, because he was really, really big into photographing cloud formations. But the list goes on. He loved his music, he loved his choir. So a couple of final things, and I feel like I've been talking for a long time, and I apologize if it feels like that, but a couple of things. I started taking notes of my conversations with Dad for about the last 8 or 9 years, because I knew he was going, and I wanted to at least have something. And so a couple of things he said. Three things, but two things I want to point out. So I have 2 wonderful sons. What have I got left? And he said this in a very spirited, good, positive way. He was never down, he was always upbeat. I have 2 wonderful sons, what have I got left? Wonderful memories. I don't think a man should be worried that he's going to die. And it was just lovely. The other thing he said to me, why do you think we were put on this planet? I wish you'd asked me that a few years ago, but it's all about, and he said, this is his quote specifically, why do you think we were put on this planet? It's all about family, leaving better people behind. They are better prepared for what they don't know. I believe in heaven. I may see my parents and friends. So thank you everybody for coming today. I'm going to hand over to Doug. My last thing I would say is that every time he and I said goodbye when we saw each other in person, he'd always kind of stand there and look at me, and he'd say, okay son, until the next time. And what he meant by that was that the conversation would continue. That was very much Dad. And so Dad, I love you. Thank you for everything. And yes, the conversation will be continued. Do you want me to stand here and hold your hand?
That's up to you.
He'll be fine. Thank you, Doug.
Well, I'm not going to talk as long as Ken.
Thank you, sir.
For me, there's a very simple line. He told us as boys, only a phone call away. Simple, but at that time, we went to boarding school young, we went to college, we were away from home a lot. And what my father meant by that, if we were ever in trouble, needed anything, pick up the phone and give me a call. A little bit harder then, because he used to say, keep 10 pence in your pocket. Quite often I needed a couple of quid, to be honest, but he said, keep 10 pence in your pocket and give me a call and I'm the cabaret. I'll be there, I'll support you. And he did that throughout. Later on, Ken moved to the US, I've moved to Australia, and that sentiment still carried on. And yes, things got a little bit easier, mobile phones and internet, and things changed a lot of the way in which that did. But that was the sentiment of Dad. He was there 100% to support us. And in those early years when we were miles away from home, and we spent a lot of time away from home, we always knew he was there. It was like our ring of steel. Dad was there. Now, Ken just told you some of the fun stuff, you know, Dad on the golf course, Dad skiing, Dad, you know, the sportsman. There was a serious side to Dad. He purchased Lampett's Farm, or Claude, his father, Bruce's father as well, purchased Lampett's Farm in 1959. 242 great working arable land farm, and initially Dad was obviously doing the arable and started one of the largest pig herds in the district. He was also instrumental in the Mendlesham Potato Company, where half a dozen of the leading farmers in the area got together and produced potatoes and sold them right across the country. He was an active member of the Suffolk National Farmers Union, which was good. For a few years later, a challenge came across the farm as the pig herd got a disease called Eulogys, which at the time meant that we had to slaughter the herd. Very devastating when you're a farmer and you bring a herd up, you know, it's close to your heart, and it's pretty hard to get going again. So I then joined the farm with Dad in about 1985. Young, straight out of college, keen on getting everything done, And one of the things that we did start was the pigs again, but this time we didn't do breeding herd, we just did a fattening herd, and we ended up, by the end of it, doing about 2,500 pigs every 3 to 4 months. Quite a lot of work, we carried on the land. But still, with 2 families now working on it, we need to have some diversification. We needed to do something a little bit different. We looked at a lot of strange things, but fortunately an opportunity came our way, and we started an agricultural machinery business in the yard at Lambert's Farm. This operated until 1996, where we were able to sell the business to a multinational. And at this time, I moved to the machinery business, left Dad on the farm. So Dad continued with the farm until such time, in approximately 2002, he retired. I had the opportunity to have a unique relationship with my father. I mean, obviously father-son relationship. I was also able to work alongside it. That always has challenges, as I'm sure some of you are aware. But overall, I like to think that we became great friends and mates as well. And I will cherish those moments always. Over the last 2 or 3 years, Dad's health deteriorated rapidly. We had the added challenge of the world epidemic of COVID-19. But Ken and I want to really thank Sin for her exceptional support, commitment and love that she gave to our father and made his last days as good as they possibly could be. So Sin, from Ken and myself, thank you very much. My 2 boys, or young men, probably unfortunately couldn't get in today. They're still in Australia, but their thoughts are here with us. We sat down and we put some words together, and as we say goodbye today, let's carry forward the love and kindness Dad showed us. And in our actions and in our hearts, Dad will always be with us. Love you, Dad.